All right, let me step in here and take us to Tyre Nichols. And as we have conversation with that and talk about police reform, there's at least two of you that have been in the room over the last three police chiefs, I do believe, to help push for police reform. So this conversation didn't just start with Tyre Nichols' death. This conversation's been going on for a while. And so now, because there was nothing done, we have his death. So now we've had the funeral, we've had countless interviews, we've had countless persons step in. Our current police chief, I give her kudos on this. Five of the officers were fired quickly. The sixth one, we're not clear, depending on the language, whether he's fired or he's just on administrative leave or what he's doing. There's supposed to be a seventh one. There's supposed to be some other ones. But the bottom line is this ball is moved quicker here than it's moved in other places. But we're like in the first or second inning. We just starting this thing. So where do you see we need to go? Where we are and where we need to go?
So can I just add this? And it's not a popular opinion, but I just do want to add this. Is yes, this has been handled swiftly, but because we are so accustomed to not getting what we need, this feels commendable when this is what your job is. I'm glad that it's happened, but I would like for us as a community to have greater expectations so that we don't even see this as this is some novel app. It just means the whole country has been screwed in our policing. Now, and other than that, and I ain't got no beef with the chief. She ain't been there 5 minutes, but and yet at the same time, what else? I know what we say other people have done in the past, but what else would she have done and not blown the city up?
Policing was trying to do what policing always do with the first initial report. The first initial statement was the cover-up. So I'm going all the way back there. I'm like, if it wasn't for those the sky cop cameras and it wasn't for the body cameras, even though they could have probably gotten out of that. Listen, if we had no video on this thing, those folk would still be working with the MPD, Scorpion Unit, terrorizing citizens.
Well, check this out. Check this out, Dr. Johnson. If it weren't for activists, you wouldn't even have video.
That's what I was going to say too. See?
The unjustified murder of Tyre Nichols in Memphis at the hands of 5 police officers has again brought attention to proper police practices. A simple traffic stop should not result in a death sentence. Looking at this leads us to the role of activists, who are critically important. In this particular case, no activists, no public awareness, no Ben CRUMP, no possibilities for change. Today, I have a conversation with 3 Memphis activists who helped lay the groundwork for the presentation of this case and the demands being made by the activists who pushed for this case to be addressed. These 3 activists are faith-based, pastors, and have been around some of the efforts being amplified by the Tyre Nichols murder. Dr. Earl Fisher is pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church here in Memphis and is the organizer of Up the Vote 901, created to increase voter participation and awareness. Dr. Andre Johnson is the pastor of Gifts of Life Ministries and associate professor of rhetoric and media studies in the Department of Communication and Film at the University of Memphis. Dr. Rosalind Nichols is the pastor of Freedom's Chapel Christian Church and the president of MICA, Memphis Interfaith Coalition for Action and Hope. The following is our conversation. with very minor edits. We give props to L.J. Abraham, Amber Sherman, Hunter Dempster, Frank Gotti, and others who are at the tip of the spear in bringing what happened to Tyre Nichols to light. In this regard, we also give a shout out to Kareem Ali. Watch the following and be enlightened. Started. Hello, viewers. You are watching Conversations with Hutch, and this is a special edition. I have 3 people on that are dear to my heart, and we want to have conversation about activism and what it looks like in our community. As I shared with at least 2 of them, I started not to do this because one of the things I don't want to be guilty of is to being an ambulance chaser surrounding Black death. But I'm doing this not so much to lift up the death of Tyre Nichols, but to lift up what do we do now that we're here, and also lift up activism. You've seen these persons that are in this screen on various shows. They've been interviewed often over these past 2 weeks. 2 of them were involved in the funeral of Tyre Nichols. We have Dr. Andre Johnson with us, Dr. Earl Fisher, and Dr. Rosalind Nichols. So they are persons beloved to me, and they are, I told them I was going to tease them, stars of stage and screen. So I'm glad that they acquiesced to be on here.
Yeah, Ron is that.
Yeah,
Ron is that.
Yeah, and some folk can sing and pray, but I'm gonna leave that. Look, now y'all know I'm gonna pay for this after this is over, but I'm teasing them in this way. Part of the reason why is, as I also said to them, 10 years ago, when there was activism in Memphis, the people you see on the screen were the clergy that were present. That's who was there. So I knew if there was an action that was going to take place, if Tammy Sawyer, and we want to give her props, even though she's not on here, if she called for an action, the people you were going to see that were clergy are right here. So I wanted to start with them. We're going to pick up with the younger set that were instrumental in the Tyre Nichols piece. I have some feelers out. We're probably going to interview them soon, but I wanted to start with y'all. So with that being said, you just jump in. Why do you think, there's some obvious reasons for it and some not so obvious reasons for it, why do you think that now we can no longer say that there's only 4 clergy at the protest, but there's a whole host of us that show up? Why do you think the atmosphere is shifting?
Okay, so I was really going to say, I mean, my first thought is, I don't know that those numbers have shifted that drastically, quite honestly. I don't know that. I do know right now that there seems to be, there's a tension. In the last few rooms I've been in the last couple of weeks, there's this tension. Some of it revolves around folks who 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago were doing this work and feel disrespected that we're not honoring what they did. I do feel that tension.
Yeah.
And it is, to me, a legitimate tension, except like what I said in Dr. Fisher's earlier presentation, which was outstanding and timely and appropriate. I was glad I was virtual. I also, Earl, was glad I was not in the room, because I kind of felt like that needed to be that space with those folks who were there, right? So, but that's just my thought. But there is that tension. And what I said in the chat in that session was that they don't know the history. We have, I mean, we have fundamentally not shared out our history, and we are up against a system that makes certain that we don't know our history.
Exactly.
So the conversation, one of the comments that was made about, you know, I got off the elevator and this person looked at me like I was crazy. Well, that was born out of the fact that that person doesn't know what you did 50 years ago.
Exactly.
So there's that part. But there is also, in your presentation, you talked about, which was very stunning to me, but I had to say, okay, I see that, is that there are Black churches, that's not new, but there are Black churches for whom social justice is not the issue.
That's the answer.
Right? And I had to, when you said it, I mean, I kind of know it for my own life, because for my life, I don't know how to not do it. Now, I ain't been on the bridge. Ain't no need to be lying. I dropped off a child before y'all jumped off on the bridge. And then after the bridge jumped off, I was like, Jesus, where is the phone? Can we find out? He's grown now. And now it's it's organizing on his own. I'm grateful for that. But I do know that we just got folks who, for whatever reason, seminary, non-seminary trained, who were raised that you take care of the body and, you take care of the soul and lead the body. So they ain't doing it. They don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents right now.
Anybody else?
I'll go after Dr. Dre.
Well, first of all, thank you, Brother Hutchinson, for inviting us. I'm just gonna assume that y'all were talking to a bunch of ministers, and you began to start talking about theology centered around movements. And I have been saying since day one, and I think, y'all know this because y'all been around. One of the things I tried to do, because I was still at Memphis Theological Seminary. I was a tenured professor at Memphis Theological Seminary, teaching urban theology, urban ministry, teaching these type of courses. And I used to tell the class from day one, you need to rearrange your theological foundation, your frameworks, background, in order to do the type of work that you feel called to. Because what's happening is that a lot of people, even in the past, might have felt like it was the right thing to do, but those ministers, those pastors, those lay leaders could not justify by their theological frameworks. They just couldn't. It messed with them. And studying and researching BLM as I have, and how people who are of faith come out to protest or to rally or to go on a bridge or whatever, versus people who think that might be the right thing to do, but just can't justify it theologically. I find fascinating. I find that, first of all, I think we ought to do more research in that. But the second thing I find fascinating about it is that theology at its core helps us understand the world that we are in. And if our theology is not big enough to handle, for instance, anger, pain, rage, all of that's out in the streets, cursing and just yelling and screaming. If we don't even know a theological foundation of the lament tradition, which is so part of all of our tradition, and part of many religious groups and faiths and traditions, part of their tradition, the lament, the crying out of sorts. If we don't understand that, it's going to be very hard for a lot of ministers to really get on board with this, because anytime you challenge power, no matter how peaceful you think you may be, when you get that first pushback, you are going to be in a whole nother realm. And usually that's when a lot of people just walk away, or they just think nothing can happen, or they just think that we're crazy. And that's why the other people are doing what they're doing to us, because we ain't nice enough. And you realize that when Jesus showed up, that's all he had to do. Just show up. He didn't say anything, because there were some folks that were going to be with him, some folks who were already diametrically opposed to everything that he stood for. And that's a hard space to be if you don't have the theological chops to understand it.
The younger generation on this call. Seriously, to the point that you raised, though, Dr. Hutchinson, and seriously building on what Dr. Dre and Dr. Nichols have said, I think we cannot underscore, the three of us cannot underscore the role that our theological formation played in seminary, at Memphis Theological Seminary, in ways by which it enlightened us relative to social justice ministry, such that by the time we launch our more public and pastoral ministries, we ground them in that social justice and Black liberationist consciousness. So when these moments come up, it is more natural for us to show up and bear witness, whereby others who have not received similar training, and some don't have to be limited to seminary, but definitely to the exposure to the Black prophetic tradition within some churches.
Yeah.
Position people to be more prepared to show up and be authentic.
Yeah.
And so since most of our colleagues have not been exposed to that, they are less likely to show up, as was the case 10 years ago. Not only that, Hutch, I remember you saying this in an interview that we did about 10 years ago when the activism first started amping up, and you was like, man, 10 years ago, this city was sleepwalking. I think that was the byproduct of a larger lull in ministry when the prosperity gospel had taken center stage.
Yeah, that's it.
And people wanted to model more of the executive and administrative posture of pastoring. They did not want to be the earthy, gritty, front lines, emergent church posture, because it was looked down upon. So by the time these moments of activism emerge, it is not popular to do.
Yeah.
Now, because of the faithfulness of Dr. Nichols, the faithfulness of Dr. Johnson, the faithfulness of those who had been at the forefront
and
when it was a lot less popular, it had become more popular because of the efficacy of those initiatives associated with it. Now we run the risk of people doing it for the notoriety and the fame.
Yeah.
And not for the nobility and the faithfulness of it insofar as the call is concerned.
Yeah.
And they don't understand how much we had to pay. Neither of us have ever been considered by anybody to be pastoring mega churches.
Yeah.
Because we realized early on, I think I could speak for Dr. Ross and Dr. Johnson, that social justice ministry ain't a church growth strategy.
Oh, it definitely is not. It is not.
So we have to come to grips with, and maybe we'll shift into this exchange. We had to recognize the cost. We had to count the cost. If you're going to do ministry like this at this space, at this level, there's going to be certain invitations you'll never receive. There's going to be certain opportunities you'll never have. There'll be some rooms you'll never be invited into, and there'll be some certain categories that you'll never qualify for.
Exactly.
And can I also add this to flavor this conversation? So MTS for me only expanded what was my grounding at Metropolitan Baptist Church. Now that's the God honest truth. And Hutchinson had that same reference in some ways when he was at First Baptist Lauderdale before this whole change. And so I didn't, when I walked at Concord and when you were, before you even got to Memphis, thank you for that. And so when I got to seminary, it just affirmed what I already knew. I didn't know I did not understand people who did social justice ministries. You remember when churches started having a social justice ministry? And I remember thinking, I mean, honestly, what the hell is that? How do you do this? And I had to have somebody, African American, explain to me that whole thing about, well, no, you just save the soul and you leave the body in bondage. And I was like, what? I don't even know how that works. So it only affirmed that, but I also have sat with this, is that from 1968 until where we are right now, the people that I know who were deep, many of whom are gone now, who were deep in that work that made me be able to sit in the spaces I sit in, there was so much death in those years, and definitely in 68. You know, you got King, you got Bobby Kennedy, it's just one after another. And they didn't even have the knowledge we have today about trauma, right? I had a mentor and friend who said to me one time, we were talking about healthy eating at the church. And she said, and then I'm gonna tell you about how I feel about how it has impacted my ministry. But she said to me, Ross, healthy, when back in the day, this is Maxine to be perfectly transparent. And she said, healthy breakfast was the newspaper, a cigarette, and a cup of coffee. Now this woman gave herself away to this city, right? But she didn't even think about none of that. So they gave so much of themselves, they didn't have nothing left. And I feel like the city went into a protracted grief that we just, I mean, I thought we'd get past at the 50th anniversary or whatever you want to call that moment, memorial, but it's just that. So there's that part that I hang on to too. Like in that vacuum, prosperity gospel, all that stuff stepped in. But because it was the root of my upbringing, I really was not fully prepared for the disconnect of people currently in knowing, no, boo, you got to put your feet on the ground and move, right? This is not going to change. That has been kind of really to me, but there is a price. And I came out of a Metropolitan would have been considered a mega church if the label had been that way in its prime. And of course, I was ordained down at Mississippi Boulevard when it was blowing up under Pastor Jackson. So I actually kind of had to have an aha moment for myself, but I never wanted mega because I like having my hands on people. And you can't do that if you got 20 million. There's no way. It's a different cost. And my last comment was, I am grateful that I've never pastored people who said to me, Pastor, you can't do that. Now I'm gonna give them that. Ain't nobody said, no, Pastor, that's not what we want to do. That's not how we're gonna do ministry. If they had, you'd be looking at me somewhere else. But I am grateful that my Freedom's Chapel, they know. What I have to make them know is, no, you're not sending me. Right? That's what I have to make sure you say. No, you're not sending me to represent you. I'm gonna need you to find your spot and sit in it too. So that's my 2 cents on that. Now, Earl put his picture up. Why?
Well, he'll be back. We ain't gonna worry about that. But
I'm just transitioning from my phone to my computer so that I can have a better presentation. So give me a second, madam.
You're all right.
Thank
we
you,
figured that, but some folk just want to call you out. See, it's bad when you have this familiarity. But let me say this real quick.
Go ahead.
First of all, for me, mine started because I came out of PNBC. I was at Concord Church where Gardner Taylor was. When you heard Al Sharpton at the funeral in his eulogy talk about William Augustus Jones, I knew him to the point that when I'd see him, he'd call me by name. And a lot of these stalwarts, I met Fred Shuttlesworth was in our convention. Abernathy was in our convention. And there's still some that are there now. There's just a remnant now. But when you grow up with this understanding, it's just a part of how you breathe. And then I found out in my family tree, I have people that created uprisings and stuff like that. So I got a case of the can't help it. I just can't. I don't know a different way to move than to move like this. But now let me do this before we talk about the cause. Are there some books that people ought to read to acquaint themselves? I'll throw out a classic, Jesus and the Disinherited. Howard Thurman.
Andre's book. Read Andre's book. That's the book you should read. Read everything Andre wrote.
No. I was going to mention.
That's right, and that's current.
Yeah, and of course read Dr. Fisher's fine book on Albert Clegg, and the key to that book is he demonstrates what Clegg was doing rhetorically. It's a rhetorical leadership book, and if you would if pastors would look at that and then kind of model their patterns after Clegg, they might can begin to understand and get somewhere and things of that nature. But as I talk anything on James Cone, with womanist theology, Dolores Williams, it's just a plethora of material out here for people who really want to do. And that's what I felt called to do, though, going back to the 10-year mark. Because 10 years, we are about to commemorate, celebrate, however you want to frame it, the Black Lives Matter movement. This is 10 years, right? This is 10. So this round is 10 years. And then you get next year, the 2014, you get Mike Brown. And then in 15, Memphis, quote, has a hashtag with Darius Stewart. And then more people begin to start coming out. But even in the earliest time, I always saw myself, or I wanted to at least see myself, or I felt called to educate, to on the ground doing this type of work. Where Roz is talking about making the connection between the history and today, And, you know, going around when people were saying that this is not your, you know, grandparents' movement, this is not, no, yes, it is. It is. It is. And let me show you why. You know, here, I know what you think. And here is the actual proof that, you know, no matter how well dressed they were, no matter how well they spoke the queens and kings English, you know, they still got their bus whooped. They still got water hoses and dogs with their church clothes on. You know, going to where we never took a, and then some of the civil rights folks were saying we never would take a bridge. I said, what is that, Memphis? I mean, golly, you almost died on that bridge. So I mean, that was my little contribution, and that's how I think, at least, when activism started bubbling up all around in the ground, and when people began to see us out there more and more, we began to develop a trust, and we began to develop some sort of like, you know, okay, you know, they cool, they, you know, they be out, they're helping us or whatever the case may be. So I took that from the streets and tried to incorporate it into the classroom, writing stuff. At that time, Earl would know this, I had the R3 blog, Rhetoric, Race, and Religion, where we were talking about these things in short form. Earl was a constant contributor to R3. And so the educational piece to me was important to help folk on the ground that had all the passion and all the fire and desire to build those bridges, because you did have folk who labored in this field, who did this type of work, who fought for the rights and the shoulders we stand on today. But just with any and every social movement, what you do is you never get all that you want. You get how far you get, and you pass the baton. And the baton is passed now to us. And guess what? When we have to pass the baton, somebody's gonna come along and gonna do the same work as well too. So that's what I was focusing in on, and I still do to a certain degree. You know, whether I'm just part of it, or if I'm, you know, called to call an action or something. So I want to continue. I think that's important. I think that's needed, especially when we are about to get all kinds of messages, because I know you might get to this question, but, you know, we haven't even talked about what the opposition may do. You know, it's always, you're always going to get a backlash, and the backlash is usually where the rubber meets the road, and a lot of people just say, oh, they just wash their hands and they're going back home. The backlash is real.
And a lot of people are not ready for the backlash. They're ready for the cameras. See, we're in a post.
They're not ready for the cameras. They just think they are. They want to be.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah, the cameras bring that attention to you too. And
well, this is part of what we
misquote you and misrepresent you and all of that too.
So this is part of what we were discussing at the meeting that Andre was invited to, that he lied and said he was invited to. You know, we were discussing for real, in part, like, if you end up in a space where you are in front of a camera and you are not astute enough or enlightened enough or savvy enough to leverage that towards the momentum of the movement, you can mess some stuff up because of the mismanagement of your own ministerial ego and insecurity. You want to be a part of it and you want to be out front, but you ain't ready for that, you know. And so there's a certain type of posture that you have to present in those spaces that some of us just need to be adequately trained on and prepped for. Right. So you hear all of us talking about some level of formation, but theological formation, social formation, rhetorical formation. Like there's certain things that you got to be able to deploy in those moments to be most effective. But people will compromise the momentum of the entire movement because they want to be included or they want to be centered. And so the camera can be a dangerous thing. Malcolm talked about this, right? And he might have talked about it in some very brash ways, maybe even in some ways that might have caused more of a rift or a splinter between the entities, the individuals, and the organizations that probably could have advanced more or made more of the moment, as Dr. Dre mentioned earlier, than they ultimately ended up doing, simply because, hey, when you don't have these long-standing relationships, it takes some time to build the type of trust that you have to maximize these moments. So thankfully for us, even before these things became as popularized as they are now, all of us had relationships with each other. All of us were preaching for and with each other and learning for and from and with each other. And so it's not hard to maneuver in those spaces when you have established that level of camaraderie and collegiality and trust. But I think sometimes people want to short circuit that. Like, give me the 3 steps to becoming, a social justice warrior or advocate. And it really cannot be broken down to that. So what I would hope is that we continue to document, and Dr. Dre is doing this, I believe, as well, if not better, than anybody else in the country. The way you document this from a faith-based perspective. And I'm glad I said that, because when you talked about activism earlier, I think one of the things that is specific and unique to who we are on this Zoom, faith-based activism is what we're involved in. There are people who are involved in very helpful, very heartfelt, very hearty activism, but it is not grounded in a theological conviction and formation. And so there's certain nuances that we have to be able to center and describe for others as we pass the baton, as Dr. Dre has said. So I think that all of those things are important to document, not just where we have been or where we are, but where we need to be.
Well, and I think saying that, Earl, I think distinguishing that also is not pejorative for those folks who are not faith-based, right? Like, we have to also acknowledge that. I sat in a room where, Earl, were you in that? I sat in a room where the man made this pronouncement that, the Christian pastors were all in the room to do such and such. And I remember thinking, yeah, but this ain't just about Christian pastors. I ain't mad. I love Jesus every day, right? But that was not. And so not only do we have to acknowledge that there are many folks working on this, and our nuance is a gift for us and those we reach, but we need all the other folks too. And I also want to thank Andre, because Dr. Johnson, because
you didn't say that when you called me Earl.
I know I didn't, because you need to get 3 more gray hairs.
I'm losing control.
But I remember being really, which may take me back to some of our elders who are also pissed, because I remember being deeply offended when somebody said, this ain't my grandmama's movement. I was just like you. But for you to take it to the next place and then do what actually Dr. Fisher asked us to do today, which was to build those relationships as opposed to discarding them, reach out and explain how we got here and document it, because they really don't know, right? And so all of this is crucial and vital in order for us to move, because we don't have capacity. This is what I said to my friend in the text message that he blasted me. But we don't, and we all know this in this Zoom, we don't have the capacity to be at odds with each other. And to your point, Dr. Hutchinson, we are going to pass the baton at some point, right? And we need that baton to be passed to folks we ain't got to teach from day one. We need them to come into the movement with some body of knowledge and history.
I got to say 2 things to that, Dr. Ross. Please, can I Hutch?
Go ahead.
So 2 things to that particular pitch I think are very valuable. Number one, we can't start every flashpoint with social justice 101 classes and think that we're going to maximize the movement. Like, at some point, we have to build upon the things that we've encountered and experienced prior to, so that we don't. And I know that there are going to be other people who are added on to the movement along the way, or at least hopefully, prayerfully, that's the case.
That's right.
But there are times when you have to take advantage of a short window, and you can't spend it trying to coach everybody on some of the fundamentals of faith-based activism. That should be done when the cameras are not around. That should be done when there's not a high profile killing or murder. But that's the last time people actually want to engage in their work.
That's right.
The other thing is about this notion of passing of the baton. Now, I think I could say this as a Gen Xer. It has been interesting to watch baby boomers and millennials and how they have maneuvered from their generational standpoints and tried to insert themselves into this moment. Now, all of us are God's children and all of us are valuable. But if we're going to have what Dr. Greg Carr would call in his Africana Studies framework, the momentum of memory, then you have to be able to pass the baton from generation to the generation. And here's the thing. For the last several decades, I think Dr. Nichols, you alluded to this. Dr. Hutchinson, you alluded to this. For the last several decades, there's been an argument. There's been an argument about who dropped the baton. Now, some might say it's because the previous generation has been gatekeeping and has never reached back or never reached out. And others might say, well, the younger generation has never reached back and they started running before we got to them. Well, if you know anything about track, the person ahead of you is supposed to start running before you get there. You're supposed to have enough momentum so that when they start running, you can hand it off to them seamlessly and not lose stride. But whether it was people who didn't reach back, whether it was people who started running, they dropped the baton. White supremacy been running circles around us for the last several decades, and we sitting up there arguing about who the hell dropped the baton.
But now the other piece is you got to run in sync so that the baton can be passed. So the older folk got to speed up. The younger folk got to slow down a little bit just so that the older folk can catch up to them. But now let me shift us because you alluded to this. I'm going to say doctor because I don't want y'all to jump on me. So Dr. Fisher, you alluded to this earlier, serious business. The cost of activism. And some of y'all have alluded to this earlier. Now, Dr. Fisher, I especially want you to speak to this because there was a time when you weren't allowed to go into City Hall. You were on a list. I think, Andre, you might have been on it too. I'm not certain.
Now, they snuck around, Dr. Dre. I don't know why, man. I think you put a call into somebody.
They didn't give me either. I don't understand that, but
I was insulted too. I went down there trying to get on it.
They told me I didn't live in the right zip code. Leave that alone. But seriously, surveillance took place, even on social media. So talk to us about the cost of activism. Because see, and one of the reasons I want to press this is because folks see you out front. But what you got to understand about that is just like pastoring. For every 2 minutes of glory, there are weeks, months, years when there is no glory. So kind of talk to us about that.
I sit with this a lot, and therapy and spiritual disciplines and things of that nature, I think, help shape how you interpret it. The most honest response I can give to any question about the cost is that you really can't calculate that cost, the mental anguish of it all, the anxiety of it all, the frustration of it all. But I will say, to the point about the glory, I don't view those moments as glorious. I view them as burdens. Like when you are in front of a camera, when you are on a platform like that, there's a lot riding on that if you are sincere about it and you're not just trying to build some public platform or posture. So you know the weight of that. And I'll use yesterday as an example. So imagine you being asked to speak on a program and Reverend Al Sharpton speaks first. Attorney CRUMP speaks first. The Madam Vice President speaks first. Not to mention Roz and Dr. Roz and Dr. Norman done already done their thing. And then they say, okay, now you go. and you got 2 minutes. Matter of fact, you got 1 minute.
And I'm gonna time you.
Yeah, you know. So if you're thinking about that insofar as like just building your public platform, yeah, there's a bunch of fly things you could say. If you think about that in terms of the weight of the assignment, where this family has just articulated the depth of their grief after the eulogy, after the this and after the, and now you supposed to provide words of comfort. That ain't no glory.
No,
that's a burden.
Yeah,
It's a blessing of sorts, but it's a burden. And so I don't view those moments like that. Now, insofar as the concrete cost of having your name on the blacklist, I think it was ageism that left Andre and the rest of y'all off. It was ageism.
Yeah, don't.
see, they were disrespecting the elders.
I'm going to take that shade, but
Elaine Blanchard on there. What
he might
on that
be
list?
right.
Elaine Blanchard.
He might be right.
There was somebody on that list. I just thought about it.
It was our love.
That list older than me.
You love Elaine. Yeah, it was. Elaine Blanchard.
You were white.
That was white. Yeah, that was white privilege. That was white privilege. They wanted to cement her legacy of social justice ministry because she's a white sister. But look, I'm on the blacklist. Abyssinian is under surveillance, and I don't find out about that until about a year or so later. These things can cause some mental anguish when you just trying to do God's will. So I don't know how to actually calculate all of that, and I think sometimes I just operate under the athletic auspices by which I was conditioned as a basketball player. It's like, okay, it's the fourth quarter, and your wind is short, and your back is hurting, and your feet are sore, but you better catch this pass and make this play, and then ice your shins after the game. But the game starts to go into the 8th overtime. So it's kind of hard, you know what I'm saying? So I, not to diminish it, not to, harp on it too much to where it becomes like, whining or whatever we want to call that. It's just a difficult thing. And I think a whole lot of people, want those moments, but they don't want the sacrifice and the strain and the struggle and the frustration and the anxiety and things of that nature that come along with it. So they see a glory, but they don't know the story.
All right, let me step in here and take us to Tyre Nichols. And as we have conversation with that and talk about police reform, there's at least 2 of you that have been in the room over the last 3 police chiefs, I do believe, to help push for police reform. So this conversation didn't just start with Tyre Nichols' death. This conversation's been going on for a while. And so now, because there was nothing done, we have his death. So now we've had the funeral. We've had countless interviews. We've had countless persons step in. Our current police chief, I give her kudos on this. 5 of the officers were fired quickly. The 6th one, we're not clear, depending on the language, whether he's fired or he's just on administrative leave or what he's doing. There's supposed to be a 7th one. There's supposed to be some other ones. But the bottom line is this ball is moved quicker here than it's moved in other places. But we're like in the 1st or 2nd inning. We just starting this thing. So where do you see we need to go? Where we are and where we need to go?
So can I just add this? And it's not a popular opinion, but I just do want to add this. Is yes, this has been handled swiftly, but because we are so accustomed to not getting what we need, this feels commendable when this is what your job is. I'm glad that it's happened, but I would like for us as a community to have greater expectations so that we don't even see this as this is some novel act. It just means the whole country has been screwed in our policing. Now, and other than that, and I ain't got no beef with the chief. She ain't been there 5 minutes, but and yet at the same time, what else? I know what we say other people have done in the past, but what else would she have done and not blown the city up? right? What was the option that she had on the table? We had a different DA, so we got different culture and context.
Praise the Lord.
So, but I will say it took a minute for us to get something other than a press release. I ain't mad. I know it's hard. Well, I might be mad. But what I know is we celebrate because we were so used to crumbs. That's my 2 cents on that particular part.
Well said,
and we don't even want to talk about the mayor because he gone.
Oh, see,
I'm after you, Dre. I could go after you.
Y'all
go ahead. Because I'll talk about the mayor, but I'm going to let y'all go.
Well,
not worth talking about.
I
mean, he's going to be gone.
Go ahead, y'all. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dre. I'm after you. I'll go after you, Dre.
I'm just going to agree with Dr. Nichols here. And let's go all the way back, though. Policing was trying to do what policing always do with the first initial report. The first initial statement was the cover-up. So I'm going all the way back there. I'm like, if it wasn't for those the sky cop cameras, and it wasn't for the body cameras, even though they could have probably gotten out of that. Listen, if we had no video on this thing, those folk would still be working with the MPD Scorpion unit terrorizing citizens.
That's right.
Full stop. With CJ Davis and with Morrow. Because that's when we had video evidence. And when you saw how they were trying to, and this is, the beating is horrific, and yes, it is. But the most to me, where there's all the money, but that just that singular, like you put salt in the wound and you find it, was the aftermath when they were trying to justify what they did.
That's it.
That's when you like, oh my God, you know.
Yeah. You know what you did is wrong.
Say it's something like, okay, maybe I'm a little bit, let me just try to cover this. And they had every expectation that was going to work. They had every expectation. They knew it. This is what I've done before. It's on tape. We got our body cams on. They're going to listen to us. They're going to interview us. We might have to go to the internal affairs for an interview. But all in all, we're going to be back on the streets, next week. Get a week off, maybe with pay. That's straight. Calm down a little bit.
Lie to a mama. Lie to a victim's mama. Don't let her go to the hospital because you ain't got no shame. You ain't got no.
Take him to St. Francis instead of to the regional medical center.
That's sinful right there. That's bearing false witness. That's one of the big 10. They're doing all of that.
But check this out. Check this out, Dr. Johnson. If it weren't for activists, you wouldn't even have
that's
video.
That's what I was going to say too, but
see, so that's one of the reasons I understand the sentiment of saying they move swiftly. None of this has moved swiftly. It's not possible for it to move swiftly because we don't get to this point without years. This is what you're bringing us to the space for, Dr. Hutchinson.
Yeah, you're right.
Document that there have been years of fierce activism and organized. This is part of, Dr. Johnson can speak to this. This is part of the problem with what's called the short civil rights movement as opposed to the long civil rights movement. Jacqueline Dowd Hall, if I'm not mistaken, is the one who coined the phrase, the long civil rights movement. Because you can't take this snapshot and think, oh, everything popped off right here and look how quickly these developments happen. The reason that you have body cameras, the reason that the TBI comes in to investigate, the reason that the TBI reports are no longer sealed in perpetuity.
That's it.
All of these developments that led to this moment, the reason that CJ Davis is the police chief.
That's it.
All of these things are byproducts of fierce activism and organizing on the ground.
Continuing.
Now, and now to the point even about these developments and where do we go?
Yeah.
I was on national television saying, y'all need to pump y'all brakes applauding the mayor and the police chief because they have moved so swiftly, or even the district attorney. And this is not to belittle what they actually did. It's just to put it in context. To the
That's
point that
right.
y'all made a second ago. If we did not do political organizing to get the
Right.
district attorney of last year out of office,
Oh my God.
the city would have been on fire this last weekend.
Mm.
Point blank,
Thank
period.
you, Dr. Johnson. That's it.
Let's put a pin right there for a second. Darius Stewart, some of y'all were in the room. We had to, matter of fact, Earl was in this initial meeting where there was 6 clergy. And we looked Amy Wyrick in the face and said, you need to get this TBI report out or else we're going to have a problem. And she was dancing and skinning and grinning. And then they come out the next morning. Because when she saw who was sitting
I don't know if it was the next morning, but it came out.
When she saw who was sitting in front of her, she knew he was serious. But then when the grand jury kicked out the case, and I think part of that is because of the DA, she called about 30 clergy in the room. And I remember she said, we need y'all to keep folk calm. And I'll never forget what Stacey Spencer said. He said, how can I keep them calm when I'm not calm? And we all said amen. So look at and I mean cut you up, I had to say this. Look at the difference in climate between then and now.
And look at the reason that the climate changed. It's because of political activism.
That's right.
So you had those developments, and now you had to peel back the layers. And here's what I think our job is going forward, and not simply, but especially this: amplify the ask of the activists and organizers who have been on the front lines, who have been at the forefront of this particular initiative on behalf of the family. Things like disbanding the organized crime unit and stopping pretextual traffic stops, all of these things, right? We need to do this. But one of the things I feel like, and we discussed this a little bit earlier, I feel like faith-based activists can do is shine the light on the truth, which means you need to develop some study and research methods so you know which questions to ask. So when you're in those rooms with the district attorney, or if you're in the room with the police director, now, even the meeting that you talk about with the past district attorney, she did not invite me to that room. Y'all, you, Hutch, I think Pastor Spencer, Keith Norman, y'all were texting me, telling me get down there. She did not invite me to that room. And when I got in there, she said, I know, you remember she said this to me, I know you're going to chew my head off about this. But the system worked the way it was supposed to. That's what she said to me when I snuck into the room. But we can ask the critical questions that uncover the truth. Who formed the Scorpion? See, these were questions that we started asking. Who formed the Scorpion unit? So did she have some track record? And now that they're trying to pinpoint her, I start asking, but who hired her?
See?
Who was in the room interviewing her? You mean to tell me Strickland didn't know her track record when he hired her? Maybe he knew exactly who he was hiring, and that's exactly who he wanted.
He did.
Because it was he
exactly.
and her. It was he and her who organized the Scorpion unit. It wasn't just her.
Right.
This wasn't her brainchild from some back room in the middle of nowhere. And anybody who thinks he would hire anybody who did not share his philosophical conviction that the answer to crime was more police officers, more specifically rogue police officers in Black communities doing that work that the Scorpion unit did. Anybody who thinks that he wasn't signing off on that, then that means you don't know how to interpret the signs. So what do?
That's right.
We bear witness with the people who have been at the scene suffering. We amplify their voices to make sure that the truth comes to light. And then we move in solidarity with other people to make sure accountability comes to the light.
This goes to the fact that in movements, especially faith-based movements, when we are out here doing it, I think it's to our advantage to always keep the moral high ground. And the moral high ground is grounded in truth. And so they may disagree with us. They may push us. They may just say, well, don't listen to them. But one thing they're not going to do is just, they can still say it. They can say we lying, but they know that if we asking the right questions and we are pressure on the right people, because I can take that one step further, because after the mayor selects the police chief, somebody got to sign off on it. It's the county, the city council.
City council.
And so the city council is also implicated in that. And this is why this becomes one of the most important elections. I know we say that every election period, but this city election right here, this one right here, is going to be pivotal. It's going to be
that thing.
It's going to be important.
It's going to be important.
It's going to be monumental. It's going to be important simply because we now can ask candidates, and I know Dr. Fisher already working on this. We're going to ask candidates, where you stand? Here is the agenda. Where do you stand? And as I said I wasn't at the other meeting, I was in another meeting, but the last meeting that I was in, I just said, it's great to know where a candidate stands, but we can also expose candidates. All the people that have been running to the microphones right now, we can get them now on record to say what you're going to do. And when they accountable, then we can say, no, you don't get our support. And matter of fact, we don't want you nowhere near an elective office.
That's right. Can I also add that we can connect the dots that we've already discussed tonight? There needs to be the connection for folks to see the work around Purvis Payne as a rule, as a placeholder for how we got to the DA issue, how that put pressure on, because people have full lives and they don't connect these dots. And so to connect the dots of how we got to the change in the DA will then inform. So it's the truth of that and the history of that moves us forward. And if we don't connect all of those dots, then people just are voting for a moment. And they're really not voting for a moment, right? So we have to speak the truth. And Dr. Fisher, we need to help people in the training to know you can't make up the truth in the moment. Right? That if you really don't know what you're talking about, stay away from that comment, right? Just stick with what you know. Because
but preachers do that every Sunday. Preachers just step up to the mic and make up the truth. That's why they think they could do it in front of the camera.
And so if we call it out, we got to call that out, right? We got to call it out. Now, you suggested that we do some call outs, and I'm saying I'm not being funny. I really think this is the path to us getting to a more whole community, is that we need to do that stuff on some one-on-one stuff, right? And help inform as we equip folks, because we can capture this moment and build on it, but only if we do the two things the three things. One is keeping people aware of how we got to right here, right? Keeping them aware. What's the history? You talked about recently a couple of things about the deacons of defense and all of these folks who were doing this work. People don't know that, right? And then talk about how we got to a new DA, because if we didn't have a new DA, we all know we would not be right here, right? And how we need to help people understand, I keep thinking about Pearl Walker, but stop having such low expectations that if your folks just do their job, you are excited. And say, no, why are you? Ask, why are you so excited about that?
I got a list of people I'm going to have a private conversation with, including some of these fake activists that come out here that show up for the moment and then disappear like the ether. And they're harming the movement because people start following them because they don't. It's like if you never learn what a real dollar bill looks like, you get okie doke by the faith. So I can put a picture of one of us on the dollar bill and you'll actually go to the store and try to spend it if you don't know what a real one looks like. And so we're at the point where we probably need to have some of these conversations. It won't be nice, but if you do them one-on-one, it might help. But we just live in an era where folk do what they want. Social media. You got so much ignorance. And I did say ignorance on purpose. You got so much stuff being spread that ought not be spread, but we just got to keep doing the work.
We got to also reestablish better expectations of the movement itself.
I agree.
We do.
So the expectations of the political office is low. The expectation of the movement is unreasonably high.
I agree.
So it's like everybody got to get along. Everybody got to agree. Everybody got to walk in uniformity and in lockstep. Not only that, you got a political infrastructure that'll put more in, they'll put more effort into interrogating the policies and the procedures that activists promote than they do the policies and the procedures of people who are elected to office, appointed to office, and employed to do it. I mean, they always like, so what's the next step? Nigga, ask the one who's in office.
Right.
and not that we don't or haven't shown that we have solutions. But if we offering all of the solutions, what are they in office for?
Yeah.
And I would love to see mainstream media. I know this is kind of utopian in the dream, right? I know this idealism, blame it on my youth. but I would love to see mainstream media be more accountable in trying to hold the people. I mean, they were taking the mayor and the police chief at their word. They take the police at their word. Like, yeah, they said it, so it is law. And I'm like, y'all should do better as journalists to get to the truth instead of just, but if the activists come out, you need to know, what authorized them to be able to say, what kind of plans do you have? Whether I had a plan or not, they plan ain't working. Now, what you gonna do about that?
One of the reasons why you have Strickland serving 2 terms and getting ready to go out of office is that the grassroots folk got tired of seeing our folk who became politicians run and say what they were going to do, then get in the office, get co-opted, and do nothing. So that's what they said, I know there's more to it, but this part of it is, well, we're going to give him a chance since we hadn't seen other stuff that we should have seen. And that, to me, that was sad, but it also speaks to the fact that we need to start holding our politicians to a higher standard instead of just accepting somebody because we're disappointed with the standards that we didn't place on the other ones and they disappointed.
Or accepting somebody because they respond to you personally, even though they're treating the masses inappropriately.
Exactly.
Too many of our colleagues,
exactly,
they would endorse somebody not because they got good policies,
exactly,
not because they got good practices, but because they respond to your text message.
Exactly.
I had somebody tell me in my 2 runs for office, I had somebody tell me, well, such and such need a job. I was like, what is that? The answer, you're not getting anything in your own community. This person is not served. And the response was, but they, and I remember thinking, we have such low expectations that we will accept, and we're not going to do no research. Now, people who got to get up and go to work every day ain't going to do the level of deep dive that we do, or, and so figuring out how to agitate folks enough like we did to get a new DA, right? To not lose traction of what that momentum took. And it's exhausting. Some of us still trying to recover just from trying to get that done. And now we need this next one. And the campaign we're working on for all of that. To your point, though, your original point is there are things Dr. Fisher has talked about, the activists and the organizations that have specific asks. So, for instance, I think I have recommended that every day between now and next January, we can come up on a year of this, we need to be posting and calling. What have y'all done about this? And if they say we did thus and so, I have asked that we post that. So you'll see, our people will see on social media, this is what they've done. If they say nothing, then we go and post no change. And every day, so that we can calculate, well, we had 365 days from January 7th to January 7th, 2024. And you ain't done nothing.
That's it.
And 1 or 2 things gonna happen. Either you gonna do something because you trying to keep your check, or we gonna know you ain't trying to do nothing. You be pissed and come after us and all of that. But we'll still know. Can't nobody live in denial.
And when your term limited out of these legislative positions, you try to run for your clerk positions and all of that because you want to receive that, we're going to stop you because we know now that you are not about the people's business. That's what want to get us so electoral savvy that no one would dare try to run for office without.
So here's my, because look,
you know what I'm saying? Without coming to the people saying,
it is time to take some of these gloves off, because we got a fellow clergy person who basically said you don't need the People's Convention. You don't need the People's Convention now, and you don't need it because the people are mature enough to pick who they feel best represents them. And had I been invited to that segment on that news station that day, since they knew they were going to talk about me, but didn't want to invite me, I would have simply said, you can look at the turnout percentage and recognize clearly the people ain't mature enough. Because you got 27% turnout, 26% turnout, 25% turnout. You think some politically savvy and engaged group of citizens are turning out at that percentage? Absolutely not. But we got people, I'm going back to the previous point, Andre, we got our colleagues, Doc, who are okay with it being low turnout as long as the person who gets in office is somebody who they feel responds to them personally.
Well, look.
But what we want to do is build. I'll be done with this right here, Dr.
Yeah,
Hutchinson.
go ahead.
What we want to do, what we're trying to do, what we need to do is add or help produce more political power, information, and representation for more people, because we believe in part that would increase voter turnout in every election. It would get us people who more represent the will of the majority of the citizens, and not people who are able to exploit and maneuver around a small group of political elites, mostly white folks who they pander to.
Well, not only that, somebody can't run using their mama's name and win if you educate the populace the way they ought to be educated. Now, I know I've done everything but call a person's name, but that's the truth. You think about it. And in certain precincts, it was said that advertisements went out with their mama's name on it. And that's what helped them win. So think about that. You got low voter turnout. You got older folk that vote. You're getting folk from the nursing homes to vote. And then they vote on name recognition, because let's be real, I'm getting older. My cognitive skills are not the way they were when I was 25 years old. So now you see a familiar name and you don't do the spade work. What happened? What do we get? But anyway, let me stop it right there. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being with us tonight. I want to thank you. Stars of stage and screen. I want to thank you. I know I saw Roz cross eyes. All right, I'm going to pull up. But on a serious note, for those of you who are watching, what we're going to do is put up the information on each of these individuals so you can buy their books, you can promote and support all of the things they're involved in. You heard about indirectly Micah. You heard about 901 Up the Vote. We're going to post all of that so you can see the links and you can act accordingly. But I hope this has given you some reference to some of the things that you have seen. This stuff didn't start overnight, but we were primed enough so that when Tyre Nichols happened, that now perhaps might be the moment where all the things that are being pushed for over the last 10, 15 years will come to fruition. So I want to thank you. Thank you so much, and be blessed.